I found this history of World War II by Sean McMeekin to be extraordinarily interesting, and I would say challenging. Challenging in terms of what I thought that I had understood about World War II before picking this book up. Now, it turns out that Sean McMeekin got access through a variety of ways to Soviet archives regarding the Second World War. And apparently that window may very well have closed with the war in Ukraine. And I can't really discuss everything that's in this book. I don't intend to. But I'll give you the main things that I found extraordinarily interesting. First was Soviet conduct, foreign policy, leading up to the German invasion, Barbarossa. And to include the war with Finland, where, most histories of World War II treat the war in Finland as a kind of a footnote. And actually, it was really very, very important, as was Stalin's acquisition of a bunch of satellites that took place prior to Hitler's invading the Soviet Union. Now, by the way, Stalin was not completely taken by surprise by this. He was expecting a war with Hitler, and in fact, he was prepared to invade Russia, to invade Germany, and he was planning to do that in July or August. And it turns out what Hitler did was to jump the gun on him. That was how he was taken by surprise. Very interesting portrait of everything that was going on prior to that invasion. Now, the other big topic in this book that I had never, ever focused on was lend-lease, the quantities of stuff that the Brits, the Canadians, and the Americans sent to Russia, particularly the Americans. It's just voluminous, and Sean McMeekin is able to explain precisely what those quantities were, how they were used in different battles, some of the really trivial stuff that the Russians got from us. And the thing I didn't know, well, we ended up making the Brits pay for every single bit of lend-lease stuff that they got from us. And we never asked the Soviets to pay up for their stuff. Very interesting narrative regarding lend-lease. Very interesting, very detailed, and somewhat challenging to read, but I found it very informative. Now, when you get to personalities, of course, the main one was Stalin, and you're talking about one of the most evil, miserable, cynical individuals you ever heard of. He really gives Hitler a run for his money in terms of being a bad guy. You probably don't need to be convinced of it, but this gives you all the more reason to understand what was going on. And also the significance, when I'm talking about Stalin, the significance of the Katyn massacre, where they killed all these Polish officers, where the Russians did that, and it was way prior to Hitler's invasion of Russia. Churchill, on the other hand, he was anti-communist, but he really had a requirement to get some kind of help in World War II, and he was really quite happy in having the Russians do the lion's share of the bleeding, the dying, the fighting. And that was why he was willing to appease Stalin. Now, he turns out to understand finally that Stalin is going to be bad news in the post-war war world, and he tries to exert some leverage on Stalin. And of course, Churchill really couldn't. He was the junior partner in all of this because of the presence of the United States and, our total capacity for just about everything. Roosevelt, on the other hand, thought he could control Stalin. He was quite plainly wrong. He never used any leverage whatsoever with Stalin. Just never did. And as a matter of fact, he caved into Stalin in terms of the invasion of northern France with D-Day, where Churchill was making very plausible and reasonable recommendations for an invasion on the Adriatic coming up through the Balkans. Well, when you read this book, you realize how important the Balkans were to Stalin and his thinking about the post-war world. Roosevelt seems to have dismissed all of that. And the United States never really exercised any meaningful influence on Stalin during World War II. And, you know, a thing I didn't realize is that American air crews that was for some reason or other was shot down over Russia or had to crash land in Russia were treated as prisoners of war during the war. Absolutely atrocious. But anyway, what this book does is it gets you thinking about Churchill, thinking about Roosevelt, thinking about Stalin, and thinking about the all this pre-war maneuvering that Stalin undertook and undertook quite successfully. This is a really good book. Took me a long time to read, but I found it quite worth it. As I say, I got bogged down a little bit in the all the discussions of lend-lease, but I found it very useful to read all about that stuff. Anyway, that's this week's recommendation. Sean McMeekin, Stalin's War. Give it a try if you're a World War II buff. See you next week.